you everyone for coming to the latest installment of the Minnesota Eviction Moratorium Phase-Out webinar series that we've been doing with Homeline. So I think we've been doing these on and off since last March of 2020. Today we'll be focusing on our guest speakers, Julia Welly-Aries, who's from Hennepin County, and Jana Filisrund, who is from Housing Link. And then you'll have me, Rachel. I am the COVID-19 Eviction Response Coordinator for Homeline, and we'll also be joined by Samuel Spade, who is a housing attorney at Homeline. So we're doing things a little bit differently today, a couple new faces from the Homeline side as well. If you're used to the Mike Farah and Eric Hauge show, as Mike likes to put it, they are not here today, so we are going to have some fun while they're away. But to get things going, Homeline is a statewide nonprofit organization. We provide free legal, educational, and advocacy services for Minnesota tenants. We've advised over 265,000 tenants since 1992 when we started. Primarily, we do that through our hotline, the number which is on the screen. We offer our services in 4 languages, English, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. We also have an email and attorney option for tenants if they prefer to communicate over email. And then our agenda for today, just so we have an idea of what, well, excuse me, that's not the agenda. This is the other resources for what we at Homeline have available. So we've got a timeline set up. Will look very familiar to those who have seen this presentation in its different aspects before. Key points and facts. We also have a phase-out webinar series. The past recordings, we've been, like I said, doing these since March of 2020. We were weekly for a little bit, and then we went to bi-weekly or roughly bi-weekly, and now with the phase out we opt to go back to weekly, and we'll continue on with these as the phase out continues. So if you would like to see past recordings, those are available on our website, and we are recording this session and will be made available on our website as well. That is also where you can see upcoming webinars. So next week on the 11th, we will have attorneys Colleen Walbren, who's part of the Housing Discrimination Law Project, and Laura Jelinek from Smurls to discuss some of the new laws that have taken effect. So there's a new one on emotional support animals in law that went into effect on August 1st. And then Sam Parmaker, who is a U of M student, is going to discuss a law that is going to go into effect on September 1st that deals with prorated rent and a statute that regulates that. After that, we will have attorney Larry, as most of us know him, McDonough, to discuss eviction defenses, as well as just how the eviction phase out and eviction courts are working at the moment. And then on August 25th, we will have Assistant Attorney General Catherine Kelly come to speak with us. So all of those are, if you want to register for those, you can go to our website, which I will post in the chat in just a second. And so some good stuff coming up here. And then, because this is exceedingly relevant to what we'll be talking about today, just in case y'all have tenants or landlords who just need some help paying rent because of COVID, there are 2 programs available currently. One that is available statewide for tenants to apply for is the Rent Help MN program, which can be found at renthelpmn.org or by calling 211. And finally, the Zero Balance Project, which is available to landlords to apply in specific counties, Dakota, Hennepin, and Ramsey, to apply for emergency rental assistance. And so With that, I do ask a couple of housekeeping things quick before we get started. If you have questions, we did have some pre-submitted questions. We would prefer that you submit your questions in the Q&A box. There's a little Q&A option if you go to the bottom of your screen. If you can use that to ask questions, especially if you have questions about the Zero Balance Project, we have the experts here, so let us take advantage of these particular knowledgeable people. And please use that Q&A function. We will start with the questions that were asked ahead of time, and then we'll move on to the ones that are in the Q&A. If you have, please don't put them in the chat. I will lose them. They will get lost in the shuffle, and I'm sorry, and I will feel badly when I go back through the chat later and see that I missed a question from you. So please put it in the Q&A. I will see it, and we should have plenty of time at the end of this to answer questions. So please feel free to ask. Just use that Q&A function, please. Again, at the bottom of the screen. All right, so, but first, before we get to discussing the Zero Balance Project, I'm going to ask if Samuel Spade can come on, and he will be going over the just the quick recap of what the phase out is going on and what current law in Minnesota looks like.
Hello, am I live?
You are, I can hear you just fine, thank you.
All right. Well, as Rachel said, my name is Samuel Spade. I'm one of the staff attorneys at Homeline, and I'm going to be talking essentially about evictions, but also about lease terminations and non-renewals, what's allowed right now. So obviously the big player in this field has been the eviction moratorium, Executive Order 20-79. This was renewed for 16 months or 15 times total, I guess 16 months in all, which is over a year and a half, but it's no longer there. It was made null and void with the session law that took effect on June 30th of this year, but it does still come up sometimes. And the main way we're seeing it come up is with the family member exception. There's no family member exception under the new law. However, there was a family member exception. The landlord could give a notice to vacate, a proper notice to vacate, otherwise valid under the lease, if the landlord had a family member that needed to move in. And that was allowed under the executive order. And we don't really know what courts are going to do with this for evictions filed now. The only case that we're aware of, there was a notice that was given, of course, when the executive order was valid, and the case was filed when the executive order was valid. It was heard in July, so after the executive order became not valid or was null and void, but it was, the notice was given and the case was filed when the order was valid and the landlord won. We're not sure if we're going to see those same results going forward, if evictions filed now are going to be allowed, if the landlords are going to win those. We expect tenants to argue that any notices to vacate given under 2079 are void, and we expect landlords to argue that they're not void if they were appropriate when given, and we'll see what courts do when they start ruling on them. But that's sort of it for 2079. Again, at this point, it is null and void and no longer in effect. So that brings us on to the new law that took effect June 30th. So we're already about, well, not midway through it, but we're making our way through the various phases. The first phase started on June 30th of this year. Landlords could file evictions essentially if the tenant seriously endangered other people or the property, or if they were committing certain crimes under 504B.171. There are certain things with manufactured homes as well, but not really from the 327C, but from a different section of the manufactured homes law. Landlords could also terminate or non-renew, not file an eviction, but just terminate or non-renew a lease for material violations. So give a notice to vacate, not file an eviction. Landlords could also file evictions for tenants who were eligible for financial assistance but didn't apply or refused to comply with the landlord or provide proof that they had applied. And this maybe should be a little bit clear in the timeline. This section only applies if the tenant was eligible for financial assistance and then, basically prevented or didn't apply or something along those lines. So that's what evictions were allowed when this session law started on June 30th. Then after July 14th, a new area was added landlords could now file evictions for material lease violations. So on June 30th, they could give termination notices or non-renewals for material lease violations. And on July 14th, they were allowed to file evictions for material lease violations. And everything from before still applies. So, it's not like the prior reasons went away. It's cumulative. They all get added together. Then, and this one is coming up on August 13th, landlords will be allowed to terminate leases and not renew them or non-renew them for tenants who are behind on rent and ineligible for COVID-19 financial assistance. And that's an important distinction why I brought it up with what was part of the June 30th exceptions, is because those were for tenants who were eligible and refused. Basically, tenants who could receive financial aid and didn't. Now on phase 3 and phase 4, we start getting into tenants who are behind on rent but are not applying. So on August 13th, they could give a notice. And now on September 12th, or I guess in the future on September 12th, landlords will be able to actually file evictions, non-payment evictions, if the tenants are behind and ineligible. But again, it's important to keep that distinction between eligible and not applying and ineligible in mind. And then finally, we move on to phase 5. This one is basically the final phase. There is one more phase, as you can see, which we'll talk about, but this one is basically the final phase. And on October 12th, we're back to normal almost, unless there are new laws passed or something like that. Evictions go back to what they used to be. Notices to vacate go back to what they used to be. You can file evictions. You can give notices to vacate if you're a landlord, and that will, well, we'll see what happens then. But there is one final phase, and we're going to talk. We actually have a whole slide on this, so we'll talk about it in a little bit more depth then. But tenants who are behind on rent and have applied for financial assistance are still protected. They have basically this safe harbor until June 1st of 2022, so next year. And so that protection will still exist. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So those are the two phases that we're in right now, phase 1 and phase 2. August 13th, obviously, is coming up. That'll be soon. And then we'll be into that new phase. There is one other thing to talk about with a non-payment of rent, and that is the notice requirement. Under the new law, landlords are required to give a 15-day notice before any non-payment of rent eviction. This is regardless of the eligibility status of the tenant. The notice must say that the moratorium has ended and that the tenant can be evicted. Also must tell the tenant how much rent is due and give some basic information about where to get rental assistance. Again, that's places like Rent Help MN or the Zero Balance Project. If the landlords don't give proper notice, courts have one of two options depending upon how the courts decide to interpret the law. The first option is they could stay the eviction. That's pretty clear. The law says that courts have the ability to stay the eviction if an invalid notice was given. But the law also states that certain types of notices are not substantial compliance of a notice means that the case shouldn't be dismissed, which implies that if you don't even have substantial compliance of the notice, another option available to the courts is to actually dismiss the entire eviction, presumably without prejudice, and the landlord can then give the proper notice and refile. But for these non-payment cases, landlords need to be giving notices. And if they aren't giving these proper notices, the case could be stayed or dismissed, depending upon the specific facts and what the court decides to do. And then, as I mentioned, there is the safe harbor for tenants if they've applied for rental assistance. Like I said, basically, this is just ongoing for the foreseeable future, almost a full year from now. If the tenant is behind on rent, but they are, or have, I should say, applied for rental assistance and they have that pending application at whatever stage that application is in, if it's pending, if there is one, they cannot be evicted. They do need to provide reasonable access. If they have access, they need to provide that information to the landlord that they've applied. But as long as the landlord has that information, they shouldn't be filing evictions, at least not for non-payment. Obviously, if there are other reasons, maybe the landlord can file an eviction or give a non-payment or a non-renewal or a lease termination notice. But for non-payment, that is off limits. So tenants are protected, again, if they're eligible and have applied through June 1st of 2022. And last, we have the CARES Act. And many people may be surprised about this because, as you can see in the slide, this eviction ban ended July 25th of 2020, and that's not a typo. It was over a year ago that this eviction ban ended. But we're still talking about it because it had a 30-day notice requirement that had no deadline in it. It just said landlords have to give a 30-day notice before they file evictions for non-payment. And that still exists. And certain counties for sure are still requiring this. I believe Ramsey is. And if the landlord isn't giving this notice, they might not be able to file the eviction. It doesn't cover all landlords, but it basically covers all federal subsidies. So if the subsidy is, anything like a Section 8 voucher or project-based Section 8, anything that would also, for example, be covered by VAWA, or certain federally backed mortgages like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And those affect a lot of private landlords, owners who might not actually be accepting any type of federal subsidy. In those cases, the CARES Act is still in effect with this 30-day notice requirement. And so it's still out there. We're not actually sure when this one will end. And then I believe that is it for me, Rachel. But I will also be answering questions here at the end.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I know that was a lot of stuff to get through, and we have more. We had a lot of questions come in about the CDC moratorium and what's going on with that. So some breaking news, I guess. The CDC moratorium that had expired on July 31st of this year is now reinstated in a slightly different way, which we'll cover in just a second. But it's in effect for the next 60 days, so until October 3rd of 2021. There's some things that are the same, some things that are different, and so this is still developing news. We don't know exactly how this is going to impact. It's going to have different impacts, of course, across the state and across the country. But I will go through what we can now with the large caveat that this is brand new again. And just, I mean, as we've been saying throughout all these webinars, the law is changing sometimes very rapidly, and we can interpret it how we think it's going to be interpreted, but a lot of times we just have to wait to see how the courts interpret things or how these play out. So we can make an educated guess on what's happening and what we think will happen, but it's really there's a lot of room for debate in a lot of this. But one thing I can say, so the CDC moratorium that went into effect is one of the big differences is that it's not a just blanket moratorium for the entire country. It is supposed to apply to counties, so by a county to county basis, that are experiencing substantial and high levels of community transmission levels of COVID-19. And that is something that they are tracking. And so I will actually get to a map of what Minnesota counties are at what levels on the next slide. But that is something, and I will share the website that I got that resource from. But that is probably the biggest difference between what was in effect for the majority of this latter half of 2020 into through the end of July of 2021. It's still, a moratorium only prevents non-payment of rent evictions, and it still defers to stronger local protections, including our own state's phase out, for the most part, is going to offer broader protections than the CDC moratorium does. As Samuel was just going over, there are protections in place for more than just non-payment of rent. And so there may be some overlap coming into phase 4, 3 and 4 with the ineligibility evictions, those who are ineligible for rent help MN. But again, I'll delve into that in a second. But one of the things that was happening consistently as well with the CDC moratorium over the last year is that there have been lots of court challenges which have gone both ways, both in favor of the CDC moratorium and both and not in favor of it. The big question I think here, and what we've been talking about in this office, is since this is only in play for the next 60 days, is that going to be um, enough time to have the Supreme Court actually hear and make a decision on what's going on with this and whether it's constitutional or not? Um, the Supreme Court is not known for its speed, and so I really can't say what's going to happen here or there. But I think that's one of the reasons why they only made it for another 60 days, um, to basically try and get some protections in place still, but to have it more focused on areas that are definitely showing increased concerns. So impacts in Minnesota. Like I said before, our phase out is a broader protection overall. So honestly, right now, not much. The phase out is still the dominant law. That's what we're going to follow. That's what the courts are going to follow. Where it might come into play a little bit more is that, again, it only applies to certain counties right now. And the definition under the CDC moratorium for government assistance is much broader than what the definition is on our phase out. Our phase out only allows for those who have pending applications for assistance with either Rent Help MN or the Zero Balance Project. Basically, the programs that were funded through the federal acts. That the CDC moratorium actually only, it just says government assistance, and it doesn't really put any parameters on money that was restricted to just the federal aid packages that were done end of last year and at the beginning of this year. So I think on September 12th, when evictions are going to be allowed to be filed for those who are ineligible for like Rent Help MN and the Zero Balance Project, may be able to be protected under the CDC moratorium at that point. Still have to sign a declaration and declare all of the requirements that were there before. It's the same declaration page. So it's, I declare that I have been trying to get assistance and have been unable to, or at least I'm applying for assistance. If I'm homeless, I will, or if I'm evicted, I'm likely to be homeless. I've been impacted by COVID-19. There's a whole list of things that a tenant has to declare in this declaration that will basically then lift the CDC moratorium umbrella to protect them from a eviction for non-payment of rent. Again, this ends on October 3rd, and so there's very little overlap in that time frame, but that could be a slightly complicated couple of weeks. So we'll see how that ends up going. So as promised, here is the map that I pulled this morning from the CDC's website. I will put the link in the chat as well in a minute, but that's also at the top of this slide where I got this from. But basically any county that is in this kind of orange or red color, and I'm sorry to those of you who are colorblind, I did not choose the colors on this map. But basically, the CDC specifies that the moratorium applies to those who are in substantial or high spread areas or high volume areas of transmission. And so that is going to be those orange and red counties. So that is, if I counted properly, that's over half of Minnesota counties are then covered under the CDC moratorium as of yesterday. Again, right now that doesn't really mean much because our phase out does have broader protections than the moratorium does, but it could come into play later on. So the moratorium, this is again the timeline, just to have a refresher quick. The timeline is we're in phase 2, about to go into phase 3 in a little over a week. And so it's really about evictions on September 12th, that tenants who are ineligible for Rent Help Amen or the Zero Balance Project may still have protections under the CDC moratorium until that ends right in the middle, October 3rd. And so I know we had a lot of questions that came through earlier before the webinar started about, asking about the CDC moratorium. I'm hoping that I answered some of the basic ones. I may not be able to answer some of the more complicated ones because, again, this is brand new, but we'll focus from here on. I am done talking and I'm going to move it on to Jana and Julia, who have graced us with their presence and their time, and I appreciate that very much. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to y'all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel. So again, I'm Julia Welly-Ayers from Hennepin County. I'm the Director of Housing Development and Finance, and also the lead for the Emergency Rent Assistance programs in Hennepin County. And Jana, I'll have you introduce yourself.
So I'm Jana Fusrand. I'm the Community Relations Manager at Housing Link, and we're one of the partners who are helping implement the Zero Balance Project. We host the assistance for landlords who are initiating applications and work on promotions for the whole program and support the rest of the team.
Thank you, Jana. So I think that I just have the first two slides. I just say flaky things, and then Jana tells you the real details that you're here for. The Zero Balance Project is a program for property owners and managers to lead applications for emergency rent assistance on behalf of their renters. So I want to start by saying the reason why we created this program is that Hennepin and Dakota led a program just like this in 2020 with the same partners, with Family Housing Fund and Housing Link and Clifton Larson. Other jurisdictions did similar projects, but I'll just speak for ours because I know it best. We engaged partners to use CARES funds to administer emergency rent assistance where landlords apply on behalf of renters in 2020. We did it in 2020 because of speed, right? We thought that the CARES Act funds were going to retire, we're going to run out of money, but we know there's all this need out there, and person by person tenant rent assistance takes a long time. It just does. It always has. Just takes a long time. There's a lot of case management. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of just making sure the renters know what's going on. There's a lot of work that goes into renter-led rent assistance applications, and it's worth it. But it was taking a long time to get our rent assistance out the door. We had a theory that possibly if we allowed property owners and managers to apply on behalf of renters, it could be more efficient because A, they would apply for an entire portfolio at a time. So just one application instead of so many. And B, they could actually be the support person for their renter in most cases. What we found was that it was very much more efficient. We kind of couldn't believe it. I think we budgeted maybe $5 million for the program. We opened it up for 2 weeks and landlords requested 10 million. So we said, whoa, okay. And then more importantly, our amazing administrators were able to process all those applications and get the funds out within a month, maybe 6 weeks. It was just extraordinary, maybe 5 times faster than our tenant-based application process with all the same checks and balances. But much more important than that, what we found was that both our renter-based and landlord-based programs were meeting our equity goals. Both were meeting renters with incomes below 30% of the area median income. About 2/3 of renters in both programs had those low incomes. Similarly, both had were meeting our goals for reaching renters in zip codes with the highest eviction rates. But what we found was, in fact, that while our renter-initiated program was doing an even better job of hitting renters in high eviction zip codes, our landlord-initiated program was hitting zip codes with even higher rates of BIPOC residents and seniors and renters overall. So we found that both programs were needed together because they actually meet different groups of people, and that the landlord program tends to support renters who just might not otherwise be able to apply on their own. So that's all just to say, we were so excited to finally get the Zero Balance Project off the ground in June. We have this page up here just to demonstrate, again, it's the exact same bucket of money as you've heard about in Rent Help MN. In addition to the state of Minnesota, several local metro jurisdictions also received emergency rent assistance. And the ones that contributed money to the Zero Balance Project were Hennepin, Dakota, Ramsey, and then the city of St. Paul and the city of Minneapolis. And again, what you'll see in this list here, they have the same income limits, they have the same period of assistance available. Applications are available, you know, people can apply until the funds run out, which they're not gonna anytime soon. The big difference is really that kind of that second bullet. Both tenants and property owners can start the applications and Rent Help MN, whereas the Zero Balance Project is one where the property owners and managers start and lead the applications. They are kind of the ones that have a little bit more control in that one, so they can support their renters. The other really key one to notice as a distinction between the two, Zero Balance Project does not pay for tenant paid utilities. So if the utilities are in the tenant's name, we cannot pay for those. But so if tenants that have those really big utility arrears, we encourage them to either go through Rent Help MN or go through LIHEAP or other sources, but Zero Balances cannot support those needs. I think that was all I want. Oh, another thing I wanted to say too in that last bullet, just that there's 34 million available in the Zero Balance Project. That again is a combination of funds from the 5 jurisdictions, and additional funds might be added. You may have heard about Emergency Rent Assistance 1 and Emergency Rent Assistance 2. We all continue to evolve based on the information that we're learning from things like what Rachel and Samuel just said. We have to continually be shifting our focus and shifting our communication as we go, and we will continue to iterate based on input we get from partners like you on this call today. So Yana, I think that's all you wanted me to say. I'll kick it to you, but be here in case any questions come from me.
Thank you so much, Julia. So you can see here the web page on Housing Link's website, which is at housinglink.org Zero Balance Project. And all of the information that I'm sharing here today, you can find on this page. So you should listen to the recording, you should share that, you should take notes. And if you missed something or want to look it up really quickly, please go to housinglink.org/Zero Balance Project, or just Google the Zero Balance Project and you will find this page. Julia highlighted this, but the main thing that is important to remember here is that landlords must initiate the application. The only way to start a Zero Balance Project application is for a landlord to submit an application, and that invites the renters to do their part of the application. Today, what I'm going to do is walk through who is eligible to apply, some tips to apply, what both landlords and renters need in order to apply, and then where to apply. I'm hoping it'll be quick and short so that we can get to the questions very soon here. Next up, the renter eligibility. So the income limits are set at what housing professionals like to call 80% of area median income. And those numbers don't make much, they're not very meaningful to me. So I really like to know what those dollar amounts are. And you can see here that it's a range that goes from $55,950 for a single person household. And it goes up from there as every additional person is added to that household. It doesn't stop. If it's an 8-person household, if you've got a 9-person household, it continues to get bigger. But this is the list that we have posted on the website. If you need information about what is it for a 9 or a 10 or an 11-person household, let us know, we will answer that. But somebody must be able to demonstrate in one way or another, and I'll give some details on how you do that later, that the household's income is at or below this number to be eligible for emergency rental assistance funds through Zero Balance Project. Next up, the renter must also have some sort of COVID impact. Now, COVID impact is very broad, and so I want people to read through this list and think carefully about it, because most people in my network have had some sort of COVID impact. So it includes some things that are pretty obvious, like reduced hours or income, or having to leave your job because it was unsafe. But it's also if you had to leave to care for somebody else, you have a child at home due to school closures or childcare closures. You had to add some additional transportation costs because of the pandemic. There are many reasons that people have been impacted by COVID. This is not an exclusive list. In the application, there's also others. So if there's something we missed, do not let the fact that the impact on your renter is not listed here prevent you or them from applying. The renter does need to attest to the fact that at least one person in their home has qualified for unemployment benefits or experienced some reduction in household income or additional costs. Anybody who meets both of those is eligible to apply. I want to talk a little bit about tips for applying and what makes it easy for us to receive a complete application, review it quickly, and make an assistance payment as quickly as possible. It won't be any surprise that complete applications that are both complete for the landlord and complete for the renter get assisted the most quickly. So it is worth taking some time up front to pull together that paperwork. It is absolutely worth helping your renters pull together that paperwork as well. There's not a lot of it. We worked really hard to make the application as simple as possible, and we have to comply with the federal guidelines. So that is what is included in our application. Another thing that's really important is to make sure that landlords are talking to their tenants and letting them know that they are inviting them to apply for assistance. So an application is only complete when both the renter and the landlord have completed their parts of the application. So if as an owner or manager, you submit an application and your renter doesn't know to look for it, misses the email invitation, or doesn't complete their part, that is not an application that we can review and assist. So let your renters know that you're inviting them to apply. They should look for an email that comes from Neighborly Software. So that email is noreply@neighborlysoftware.com. But if they look in their email and there's something from Neighborly Software, that is the invitation. There's a link in that invitation that they can click on that takes them straight to this application. But if they don't know it's there, if it gets caught in a spam filter, as we've been doing proactive outreach, a lot of people are very concerned about scams that are asking for personal information, and we do ask for personal information. Let them know that this is a trustworthy email. Something else that you can do is to help them submit their applications. So we have seen different owners and managers provide that kind of help in different ways. Some are sharing on-site internet access with all of their renters so that they have easy access to upload anything that they might need to upload or to complete that application. Others have encouraged or directed their on-site staff to provide one-on-one assistance, and landlords have been an incredible partner throughout this program and are working with their renters to make sure that everybody comes out of this pandemic whole. That is our goal. So please help them apply, or encourage your landlord to help you apply as is appropriate for your site. Let's see, one other thing is you can ask community helpers to help. So depending on which of the counties you're in, there are some official contracted helpers, or there are others in the community who are working really hard on a less formal basis to help people submit their applications. We're working to expand that network of helpers right now, but ask community helpers to come and help, or connect your renters to community helpers who can help. So in Dakota County, that is Communities 360. And they have been doing some on-site clinics at apartment buildings. And we would love to know who else is doing that, so that if we get calls, we can help make those connections as well. I want to make sure that you know that there is an email to ask for help as well. So Housing Link is providing a lot of support and assistance, in particular, first and foremost, to landlords to get their applications in, because without that invitation, renters can't complete their part. So our email is zerobalanceproject@housinglink.org. We're encouraging renters to follow up with the processing team, and that's on the Family Housing Fund side. Their email is zerobalanceproject@fhfund.org. We talk to each other all the time. So if you get to the wrong place, we will connect you to the right place or do everything we can to help you in the meantime. So don't let that stop you. So those are some tips for getting through that review and payment process quickly. And next, I want to talk a little bit about what everybody needs to submit their applications. So first up, what it is that landlords need to submit an application and invite their renters to access the program and do their part. So we need a completed W-9 form. This is a very simple form, and if you have one, great. Simply upload it once you get into the Zero Balance Project application portal. If you don't, we have a link for you to download it and fill it out while you're in the application or on the Housing Link Zero Balance Project page. You do need a full signed copy of the lease for each renter that you are inviting to apply. For informal lease situations, we have some alternative options available, but the easiest, simplest thing is if you have a signed lease, be ready to upload that. We need a property tax statement that shows where the property is located. So this is mostly because Zero Balance Project is eligible for properties located in Hennepin, Ramsey, and Dakota counties. And so we don't care what your property taxes are. We don't care about the payment status of your property taxes. What we care about is the property located in one of these counties? And you can download that. So we've got links again on the Housing Link website and embedded in the application that connect you directly to where you would download that so that you can get your copy and then put it into the application. Fourth thing you'll need is a rent ledger that shows the unpaid rent and fees and utilities that are included in the lease, because Zero Balance Project can pay for utilities that are included in the lease where the renter pays directly to the landlord and the landlord pays the utility company. So that needs to be itemized by month, and we need a rent ledger that lists out what that amount is. You will enter that into the application form as well on a month-by-month basis. That is part of the application, so that's a pretty simple piece. And then finally, you need the renter's email address. This one is really important because I've mentioned this a couple of times. You submit an application as an owner-manager, and then once you hit submit, it automatically and immediately sends an invitation email to the renter, and that is how they access that application. So be sure that you have an accurate and current email address for all of the renters that you want to invite, and then make sure that you type it correctly. We have discovered a few instances where somebody dropped an M off of the end of @gmail.com, or where somebody flipped a couple of vowels in the email and then it bounces. And then unfortunately, the renter that you've invited to submit doesn't even know they've been invited and they're not able to do their part, and then we can't approve a payment. So that is why it is very important. We have seen some situations where people's children or family members have helped them complete their application. And so if that is another way of getting an email to a renter so that they can access that because they maybe don't have their own email or they're not comfortable online, that is a great way to help your renters submit their applications. Some folks, I think, have helped renters set up their own email addresses. I think this is less common, but if that is what works for you and your renters, help them set up their own Gmail address, make sure that they have access to it, give them a little tutorial on how to use it, and that also would be a way that those renters could submit their applications. We do have the ability to take applications over the phone. Now, this is a little bit harder. So the Clifton Larson Allen Center is able to accept an over-the-phone application from renters. And it is hard because there does need to be some uploaded documentation. So if it's possible to do it online directly, that is a little bit easier and more accurate. and it speeds up the process. And similarly, we do have paper applications. This is in particular for applications in Oromo and Karen. We do not have translations that are live online web portals for those languages. So those must be done on paper, but anybody who can't do it and needs to do it on paper may. We find that the paper applications tend to have more errors, take more back and forth, and are slower to process. So that again is a reason the online applications prevents you from making those errors. So those are all of the pieces of what a landlord needs to apply. W-9, lease, tax statement showing where it's located, rent ledger with details on what is owed and when, and the renter's email address. There is a little sub bullet here that if a renter pays with the help of an income-based subsidy like Section 8, you do also, in that case and only in that case, need a notice from the Housing Authority showing how and when their portion of the rent was adjusted due to that loss of income. That's not something we've seen a lot of with the Zero Balance Project, and that's the last piece that might happen. Moving on to what renters need to apply. This is a little bit shorter. So part of how we designed our application was to ask landlords to provide a little bit more information, because we know that that is easy at hand for most landlords. And we wanted to make the renter side of the application as simple as possible. So there's really one set of documentation that we're requesting, and then some parts in the application where the renter is confirming eligibility and affirming some of the statements that were made by the landlord. So the first thing and the documentation piece that we're asking landlords to include in their applications is verification of income. We have to confirm that they make 80% of AMI or less, that long list of incomes there. And we've got a variety of options. Hopefully one of these is easy for each person. We know that it isn't always, and that's why we really want you to reach out to those helpers to help renters figure out what they can submit most easily. So one option is the first 2 pages of their 2020 tax return if they submitted a tax return. If they're eligible, that is all they need. A second option is paperwork showing eligibility for some other program that serves people on limited incomes. So that might be SNAP paperwork or WIC or Section 8. There are many programs. This is not an exhaustive list here on this slide, but anything that requires a household to have an income at 80% of AMI and below, that kind of paper documentation, again, dated after January 1st, 2020, that is another way of documenting eligibility in terms of income. The third option also works great. It's a little bit more work for renters, and that's uploading income statements over the last couple of months. So that's pay stubs, child support payments, other sorts of regular monthly payments or income that document that your income is at below that amount. That does need to be for every single person who's living in the household. So if you've got multiple income earners, then this could be quite a bit of information to upload. If you don't have any income, there is an example in this option 3, which is a certification of zero income form. And this is embedded in the application. So you can also, as a renter, certify that you have zero income and upload that. And that is signing a statement that that's true and uploading it. So that also meets that verification of income requirement. So that's the harder part of the renter application. The rest of it is all embedded in the application. It's really going through the screens and confirming things. So you need to confirm the COVID impact or eligibility for unemployment insurance. And there are some check boxes and you can sign right in the program. Then you go on to confirm the amount of unpaid rent or fees as they were submitted by the landlord. There's an opportunity to correct those if there's any errors in what was submitted. On that page, there is also the opportunity to apply for future rent. So the program is designed that we must first cover all of the amounts that are owed in the past that are already overdue. We can fund up to 15 months of assistance. And if you will need assistance for up to 3 months into the future, there's a click box saying, and in addition to this request, because I haven't yet exceeded my 15 months, I do want to request 3 months of assistance for the future, and then you can do that as well. All of that again is in the application. And then last, you need to list any previous emergency rental assistance. So if a renter benefited from the landlord program that Julia described, or from CHAP, or from any other emergency rental assistance, then the renter does need to list out how much that was and when that was. That's again in a form. And then the last submit page says there are a number of questions about here's how the program works and the program rules. You confirm that you've read those, sign and hit submit, and that is the full application. We're hearing that it takes roughly half an hour to complete this application for renters. So that's everything people need to apply, and I'm sure there'll be some questions. I look forward to that, but I have a couple more things I want to say before we finish up here. If you're curious about the status of all of the program, we've got a dashboard that's it's on the sidebar of housinglink.org/zero balance project, and it shows a couple of different things. It shows how many applications we've got and where they are in processing. It also shows how much funding is available and how much of it has been paid out, how much remains. And then there's another page that I didn't include a picture of here that shows the demographics of who has applied. And we are seeing that again, most of the applications are from people with very low incomes, and that there is a demographic, racial diversity in the applications, and there is also ethnic diversity in applications. So if you want to see those details, you can see it for the whole program or any one of the counties or the cities if you go to the dashboard that is on that Zero Balance project. So wrapping up here on the next slide, if you don't have it yet, housinglink.org/zero balance project. Again, this is the place to go to find everything that I just said. And for landlords who are ready to apply, once you get to that website, you review the information, scroll down to the bottom of the page. It's quite a ways down there because we wanted to make sure that you see how Rent Help MN and Zero Balance Project compare. There is a link that says apply here. You click on that and that will take you to what's on the last slide, which is the portal to set up your account, log in and start the process. Again, once a landlord starts, it automatically sends that correctly typed in accurate current email to the renters and invite them to do their part. When the renters get through, then we start processing very, very quickly. So with that, I don't think I have anything to add. I'm going to invite Julia to add anything that I might have missed. If there is anything, and if not, we'll take any questions, and I look forward to hearing everybody's questions and answers.
Thanks, Jana. That was awesome. Well said. I would just be eager to hear if there's any questions for us.
Well, thank you both very much. That was very informative and greatly appreciated. So we have a couple of questions. I'm going to focus on the kind of rent help and the zero balance questions first, just since we have you here with us. We've got a little over half an hour, so if you do have questions, even some more maybe nitpicky ones, feel free to ask away. We have plenty of time to get to them. So first off is a question from Belinda, actually. They're asking if a tenant's landlord applied with zero balance on their behalf and the tenant receives a partial payment through another organization, how would they update zero balance of the assistance?
So there's some trucks in the background where I am, so if you can't hear me, let me know.
No, I can hear you fine.
Is it fine? Okay, great. So we would ask you to contact Zero Balance Project at fhfund.org. Again, if it gets to the Housing Link one, we will forward it and let us know that there's been a partial payment, and then we can work with you to get that updated within the application so that when we make a payment, there won't be any duplication of payment between that existing assistance and what we are able to assist with. And also to make sure everything is accurate. Sometimes we find that people want to add a month on at the end because it's taken a little while to get that payment, and we are very happy to update that ledger so that it is the most current request, and it allows for the right amount of future rent if there is a future rent request as well.
Yeah, could you drop those emails into the chat for the attendees to get? And kind of jumping off of that, my own question as well is there a place to call, or is it just email to kind of get like a status update or something? You figure out where things are at.
So something that I love about our portal is that both renters and landlords can log back in and see the status. There are many different statuses. You can see your application work its way through the process. So we encourage people to go in and check it out there. Certainly you can also contact us, and part of why we encourage people to email us is that we know exactly what your question is and can respond very quickly that way and get you exactly what you requested. There are phone numbers as well. So for landlord assistance, we encourage you to call 612-200-1614. And for renter assistance, we encourage you to call 612-895-7880. I will drop those in the chat.
Thank you.
And it will not be any different if you email or if you call.
Nope.
So we look forward to helping people, however it is that works best for them.
All right. Thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to ask a question that partially it's Ben's question, and I know Samuel is still on. He may want to jump on to answer the other half of this question. So if a lease requires a tenant to pay utilities, would the non-payment of utilities, including the delay of rent help amend aid, constitute a material breach of lease that could be grounds for an eviction? From that, I want to ask you all, does Zero Balance cover utilities, and how, if someone is like waiting for assistance on that, how can they show that they've got that pending application to, say, a utility company or such?
Okay, so Zero Balance Project does not pay tenant held utilities. So if a renter has, has both rental and utility arrears, and they are at risk of eviction, and I would have Sam speak to that piece, but if they're at risk of eviction due to not paying their tenant held utilities, then their best bet is to go through Rent Help Amend. Rent Help currently cannot support someone who only has arrears and utilities, so it would not help them to ask us for rent and then ask Rent Help for utilities. And that's a really, really crucial point. So again, I'd ask Samuel to speak to the piece about can they be evicted for not paying their tenant held utilities? But certainly Zero Balance is not a way that they could protect themselves from an eviction for not paying their tenant held utilities.
And sorry, this is Samuel. Just to clarify, when you say tenant held utilities, because I'm curious about this as well, what about utilities that are paid to the service provided by the landlord and then rebilled to the tenant through some type of subdivided, like a portion billing system?
Yana, check me if I'm wrong, but if the utilities are in the property owner, property manager's name, we can pay them. Does that make sense? So even if sometimes the lease will say this part of your rent is rent and this part of your lease is your water payment. But if the utility bill is actually in the landlord's name, we can pay it.
Okay. Yeah, and so to answer the eviction part of the question, I would say that generally, and maybe even almost always, I would say that it would be non-payment. But it is unclear. There are unpublished court cases that are pre-COVID where courts have held things like utilities or obligations to buy insurance are equivalent to non-paying rent and kick in things like the right to redeem or the redemption right to pay and then continue to stay. So landlords are not able to file, and again, this is pre-COVID, but not able to file things like evictions and say the non-payment of utilities is pure breach of lease. Tenant doesn't have the right to redeem. And the tenant in those cases would actually have the right to redeem, could pay the utilities and continue to stay. But then, this is all new. So you have questions like, well, Rent Help and cover utilities. Well, the zero balance project cover utilities. We've just heard the answer to that. But there's the two different parts of that. And then also there's the question of, okay, so then which phase would the tenant fall under if they are counted as rent? If utilities are rent, but they're not covered by rent help them in or zero balance, does that mean they're ineligible? And so then you're under phase, I don't have it up in front of me right now, but I think that's phase 3 and 4. Under those eviction statutes. So it gets messy, but I would say it's almost always going to be considered non-payment of rent. I should also point out that a lot of leases just flat out say utilities are rent. And I think courts are going to pay attention to that as well. But it's probably going to be non-payment of rent, which means you're probably going to have to consider which category of the moratorium it would fall under and go from there. The one thing that I would say as an exception, especially if I were talking with the tenant about this, is that often, I shouldn't say often, but with many utilities, especially depending upon the time of year, if the utility actually gets shut off, so we're not talking just about owing money, but the utility is turned off, that can harm the actual building. I mean, a very classic example would be no heat in winter. And then you get into things like breach of lease, substantial damage to the property or so on. And those ancillary things could form the basis for breach of lease eviction. So at least when I'm talking with tenants, I'm always telling them, if possible, to keep the utilities current. They don't want to. They don't want their utilities to be shut off and cause damage to the building. But to sum up, almost always going to be non-payment. Not sure if they would qualify. It could depend on whether they would qualify for assistance, which could put you in a different category for the moratorium. But if getting utilities actually shut off causes damage, then you enter lease breach territory. At least that would be my take on it.
So this is how lawyer brains work for y'all. And I really appreciate that thorough answer. I will add to it that we're trying to keep track of some of the evictions that are being filed, especially in the metro area. And this is, some landlords are trying it right now. That's basically where non-utility, the only thing that's listed as non-payment of utilities for an eviction reason for a lease violation. So we'll see how that goes. One of those, I think that each court is probably going to decide in a slightly different way. So we'll see how that shapes out into a consistent answer. Thank you for that. All right, back to a zero balance question. Do you want me to flip back and forth, or do you two want to just like rock, paper, scissors for who answers questions? All right, so this is Mino, I believe is how they pronounce their name. If a landlord applies for zero balance, tenant completes the information requested, but has also completed the rent help tenant application. Is there systems in place for landlords who may be able to trying to double dip and are encouraging their tenants, even if they hear that a tenant applied for rent help MN on their own?
I'll start with that one, Rachel. There are definitely systems in place, excuse me, as required by Treasury. All emergency rent assistance programs require both the renter and the tenant to attest that they're not receiving assistance from another emergency rent assistance program. So if a landlord receives emergency rent assistance for the same renter, for the same unit, for the same month, they need to give that money back. They have attested that they will do that. So in and itself, there's a piece where landlords are promising not to do that. In addition, of course, renters are a part of the application process. So as Yana was saying, renters have opportunities to say, oh, shoot, you know what? I forgot I even applied for that other program 3 months ago. I did get assistance for these 3 months. Can you still help me for these 4 months? So there are opportunities for the renter to do that. We can't provide assistance to a landlord without a renter agreeing that they need that assistance. And then in addition to that, we have we're working with Minnesota Housing continually. We're actually sharing data between the two programs. And so we catch when there are applications when the same renter is in two programs. And Yana has worked really hard to create a sort of a plain language process for reaching out to those renters who are in both systems to say, oops, you're in both systems, and kind of gives them their next steps about what to do. So there are several backstops in place to prevent landlords from double dipping. and more importantly, to just help renters and landlords who are swimming through these complicated processes and kind of forget where they are in the system. What did I miss, Yana?
Well, I would also say that we are thankful that people are looking for assistance and asking for help, right? What we want people to do is to come out of this pandemic whole, and that's renters stably housed without rent arrears and landlords able to pay their mortgages and utility bills and taxes, right? That's what we want, and that is what we're working for. So we are really thankful that people are applying for assistance and asking for help. And we will do our best to work with you and help you navigate the fact that there are many different emergency rental assistance programs that are not easy for people who are on the other side of the screen, the other side of the program, to identify how do they fit together, what works for me, and that is our job, is to help and support you through that process.
The best way to say, if you do have two applications in somewhere, the best way to let you know about that is through those emails, right? Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go to one of our pre-submitted questions from Ling, who's a landlord. And Ling just wants to know if the landlord has received 10 months of rental assistance through Rent Help MN, but the tenant still owes rent, can they apply for another 5 months of rent through, say, can the landlord apply for zero balance for those 5 months that are still owed?
I can take this one. So that renter can get 5 more months of assistance that we paid to that landlord, and we strongly encourage you to go to the same program who assisted you in the first place. So Rent Help MN has a button on their website where a renter can go and request additional assistance quite quickly. And part of why we want you to do this is that the review process takes quite a bit of work. And once a renter has gone through one of the programs and it's been confirmed that they're eligible for assistance, that doesn't have to happen again if you go back to that same program. So go back to the same program you're in before, request additional assistance. I think that the button isn't yet live on the Zero Balance project page yet, and we're working on getting that live as well. So we're newer, and that's why we haven't gotten there yet, but both of us will have this button to reapply, and wherever you got assistance first is the place to go back to.
Thank you. Yeah, the reapply button, I think, is a big it makes lots of people feel calmer about having that existence. Okay, we'll go with Kimberly. Just put a question in. She's a landlord, and she's saying, I'm a landlord that applied for zero balance when I didn't know that the tenants had applied for the Rent Help MN. And so then zero balance denied them for duplicate applications. The status on zero balance says that they can appeal. I have tenants that have done that because their apps have been in initial review status for several months, I assume with Rent Help MN. What basis will you allow them to go through zero balance if they appeal?
Yana, I am stuck between what is now and what is future. Can you remind me what we're doing right now?
So, we're communicating between both programs.
Yep.
And so there are 2 different duplicate application statuses, and one of them says that you can appeal and one of them says withdrawn. And that's based on where in the review and payment process is a particular application with Rent Help MN. So there's a certain point in the process where the request to process the check has been sent off, and you can't stop that anymore. And so when we find out that that's where something is at, that's when something is withdrawn and cannot appeal. If it does say that you can appeal, you certainly can appeal. And then there's a link in that email that your renter got. The renter is the one who has to do this. A landlord cannot submit an appeal. So have your renter do that if that's what they want to do and that's what you prefer. They get to decide. The renters get to decide on this one. And then submit that appeal, and then we will log that internal in our system and continue to communicate about that with Minnesota Housing.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Do you happen to know, on average, how long an application is taking to go from, say, submit to check out the door? Or I assume you're also doing electronic payments like ACH, EFT stuff.
So we are not doing electronic payments, so it is check
Oh.
out the door.
All right.
And I'm going to give a slightly unsatisfying answer, and I apologize for this. The reason is it varies a lot, right? If we get a complete application and both the landlords and the tenants applications are complete, the processing is pretty speedy. But it varies a little bit because making sure that we're coordinating with Minnesota Housing and Rent Help MN on deduplication, that adds a little bit of time to the process. And it depends a little bit on if you, like the day after we get the list, things are going out quickly. And at other points in time, there's a little bit more wait there because it's not happening all day, every day. But what really takes a lot of time is if the applications are incomplete. There's quite a bit of back and forth between our processing team and both landlords and renters where there's a tiny bit of information missing, or maybe they're trying to figure out, how do I document this piece that's required in the application? So the applications that are complete and in full move quite quickly. They might take several weeks from submission to payment, but there are a lot of unknowns in there, and so we don't at all want to suggest that that's what people should expect. We are working quickly. You can see your status. If you're worried or confused or not sure what's going on, contact us and we will help figure out how to get it moving as quickly as possible and tell you everything that we can about your specific application.
Jana, and can I add to that? When the landlord starts the application, puts everything in there, their part is complete, until the renter goes in and starts their part of the program, we can't do anything with it. So that part about that, have the conversation with your renter, ask them what they need to do their part of it, ask what assistance they need. That part really is crucial to get going. But Jana, I'm going to challenge you. Okay, I am a property manager. I'm not really, I wish I was. I'm a property manager. I start an application for a renter on Monday. I talk to my renter, I ask what help they need. I set them up with Wi-Fi in the building. They complete their part of the application on Wednesday. There's no duplication with any other system. When are we going to cut the check?
I also feel like I can't answer this question.
Oh.
I wish that I could, Julia. We will start and get through that review of the application. I think typically within a week.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be faster. And then there are some other pieces on the back end that just add uncertainty, and I don't want to make any promises I don't know we can keep.
That's perfect. Thank you, Jana. That's exactly what I was hoping for you to say. That the real piece of it is that the more that you and your renter, more that the renter and the landlord are working together on it, and keeping in contact with us, the faster it goes. And we have such a good team behind this work.
I know a question that we've had in the past is, and this might be more specifically for Jana, but I think maybe Julie as well. One of the frustrations I know folks have is that the Zero Balance Project is only offered in a limited county. And so is there any talk, do you know of anything or any reason why this couldn't be done on a larger scale, especially given how effective your program seems to be?
Lovely question. I love that you said that. So one challenge is the reason why Hennepin, Ramsey, Dakota, Minneapolis, St. Paul could all do it is that we were entitlement jurisdictions for the emergency rent assistance. So of course, beyond our communities, there are only a handful of other communities in the state that receive the assistance. So for example, if you look at Wright County, they don't have, they're not an entitlement jurisdiction that can just run this on their own. And then broader than that, I think Minnesota Housing would have the option to do this. And of course, landlords can start applications and rent help amend as well. So I think that would be a conversation at that level. But I think the biggest thing is just the local jurisdictions, we're so lucky to have gotten an entitlement just on our own so that we could kind of adapt it to what's happening on the ground here.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Kimberly has a follow-up question, potentially for Jana. How long does it take once it's been approved, I assume the application, but the status says submitted for second review?
So I talked about how there are many different statuses on the application, and the processing includes an initial review and a second review. And those are part of that, typically, hopefully about 1 week's worth of review. Both of those go in there. And again, there are sometimes some questions where if there's an uncertainty or something that takes a little bit more digging in either the first or the second review, it may not require interaction with the renter or the landlord to find out what's going on there. It might be something that the reviewer can look up online. But that is part of that roughly, typically 1 week, things are moving through the system right now to get towards that approved and paid status. So we can't make any promises. You can reach out potentially to those emails and ask if there's any additional information. And I think keep an eye on it, keep checking it. It should be moving quickly.
Perfect. Speaking of moving quickly, y'all took a break for a little bit about a month ago to process applications and see how things are going. Is there any anticipation that you might have to do that again, or is it kind of full steam ahead until balance reads 0?
Love that question, Rachel. So when we initially launched the program in June, it was intentionally a 2-week program.
Mm-hmm.
We had heard input from several property managers that they like to be able to just know what the actual deadline is, to say, if I get my application in by this day, then it's not first come, first serve. I'll get served. And so they kind of have a period of time to do their homework, frankly, put together a great application and submit it. So we responded to that by having that 2-week sprint and saying, in this period of time, if you do your homework in time, there's no scarcity concern. After that first sprint, we again got feedback from landlords, heard how it went on the processor side, and realized, okay, we did that, and we think pipeline is the way to go now. So it was more of a shift based on what we were hearing. So at this point, it's rolling until those funds run out. You saw on the dashboard from Jana, we're not at risk of that right now. We really want to encourage people to apply, to work with your renter and landlord together, get in those good applications. Do not worry about funds running out. And as I noted, the funds that are in the system right now are only from the first allocation of emergency rent assistance. So there's money to go around. We really just want to get good applications.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, and yeah, I think Kimberly may need to send out those emails that were included. It sounds like you have some very specific questions that are going to be probably more better answered by someone who's specifically answering those emails at this point than by the group at large. So we do have about 10 minutes left. And there were a couple other questions that are more, some of them are about the CDC moratorium, and some of them are about the CARES Act and the phase out. So feel free to, if you want to put in more questions for Jana or Julia about the Zero Balance Project, feel free to do that. But I'm going to switch over to some of those other questions. And if you have opinions about them, please chime in. This is a conversation to have. So one of the things, so we had been asked, Kim, as a landlord, and I'm hoping, I'm just going to reiterate some of these things. I think I may have answered most of these already, but Kim is asking if the CDC or federal moratorium takes effect again, which it has, which supersedes Minnesota off-ramp we're currently in or the federal one. And it is right now, the Minnesota off-ramp is the one that applies to Minnesota, as it grants broader protections than the CDC moratorium does. possibly another Kim or potentially the same Kim, wants to know if the CDC ban is extended, will we still be able to non-renew expiring leases for ineligible assistance tenants on 8/13? And that is an excellent question. And so the CDC moratorium specifically is about evictions. It doesn't talk about lease renewals or anything along those lines. And so I'm just going to go, sorry to scroll back all the way through, everybody. But going back to this, so what Kim is talking about is phase 3, where landlords can terminate leases and not renew leases for tenants behind on rent who are ineligible for COVID-19 rental assistance. The CDC moratorium isn't really going to touch that since it's very specifically about evictions. Again, Samuel, if you have a different opinion about that, happy to hear it. Or if anyone else, Yana, Julia, has a different opinion on that interpretation. Like I've been saying before as well, this is all very theoretical at this point. But from what we know of what it says and states in the CDC moratorium, and we know and it says in the Minnesota off-ramp or phase out language, the CDC specifically applies to non-payment of rent evictions. All right. And then all right, I think that's it, because yeah, Carrie also is asking how the CDC order affects Minnesota's off-ramp law. Does Minnesota qualify? Again, it's very specific to, and I'm going to go forward just a little bit to that map. So again, these are the counties that are the statuses of the various counties as of August 2nd, actually. And so the counties that are in orange and red, which is most of the metro area and some of kind of on the western side for the most part. The counties that are in blue and yellow are in moderate and low transmission rates, and so they do not qualify under the CDC moratorium. But again, right now, that's not really an issue because the CDC moratorium, it doesn't have much impact on what's happening at the moment in Minnesota and when it comes to evictions. Okay, Samuel, these are going to be from Anonymous, and they're going to be more about what you were going over with the phase out. And so first off is Anonymous is wondering, shouldn't the CARES Act 30-day notice have expired at the end of July? Potentially, I don't know if they meant July of 2020 or July of 2021. I'm assuming July 2020 since that's when the rest of the CARES Act expired. So they're wondering, how is this considered still be hanging on after the Supreme Court case?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not actually sure which Supreme Court case they're referring to. I don't think there was a Supreme Court case about the CARES Act.
Not that I'm aware of.
There was one about the CDC moratorium recently, but again, that's not the CARES Act. The CARES Act was passed into law. It was signed by then President Trump. And I mean, it basically said that during a certain 120-day window, no evictions for non-payment could be filed for certain properties, not for all properties, but for certain properties. And then after that 120-day window, if landlords wanted to file an eviction, they had to give a 30-day notice. And, you know, maybe we've missed something. It's certainly possible. We do follow the federal updates, but I don't follow them as closely as I do the state updates. So maybe I missed something there. But again, I'm not sure that I don't know of any Supreme Court case about it. I don't think there's been any change to it. And again, as far as we know, Ramsey is still requiring proof of this. And we're aware of people nationally, at least as of a few weeks ago, still requiring it as well.
Excellent. Anonymous also would like to know, the safe harbor clause, does the tenant have to have applied for rent help amend the last phase of the moratorium phase out, or any time after the last phase, are they still protected if they prove that they applied?
I'm pretty sure the answer to this question is yes. The protection under Section 4 is very general. I can even quote a portion of it. It just says, notwithstanding any law to the contrary, including Section 2, the filing of an eviction action or proceeding with an eviction action based upon non-payment of rent against the tenant with the pending application for assistance is prohibited. I paraphrase there a little bit at the end, but I mean, it just says if there's a pending application for assistance, you can't file an eviction for non-payment until June 1st of 2022. So, I agree that there's definitely going to be some interesting cases because, if Rent Help MN still has money, for example, in December of this year, and there's been no other changes, and the tenant falls behind, but then immediately applies, I think they're going to be protected if they apply before the landlord files.
Yeah, I agree. And especially other things to consider as well is that, things are still changing. The CDC just also put out, new mask guidelines. And so, the Delta variant is certainly making things challenging, I guess. So we may still be in flux, things may still change going forward. This is just the best of what we know right now at this moment. All right, so that's actually the end of the questions that we had. So I'm sorry to say, go back through these slides real fast. I'm sorry for any whiplash. And just make a plug once again for our upcoming webinars for over the next few weeks. And some of it is not specifically COVID-19 related. We are going to try and touch base about some of the new laws besides the phase out that were passed during this last session. That's going to be next week. And then we will move right back into COVID-19 related content on August 18th with Larry McDonough. So if you would like to register for those, you can go to our website. And once again, a plug, if you do need assistance with your help, as Julie and Yana both were saying, there is funding available and we would like to use it, or they would like to use it. I don't have anything to do with it, but they would like to use it. So please either apply if you're a tenant at Rent Help MN, or utilize the Zero Balance Project if you are a landlord. And with that, I want to extend out yet again another big thank you to Julie and Yana for helping go through all of that content with the Zero Balance Project today and answering all of those great questions. Thanks for joining us. And this recording should be up on our website in a week or two. So take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.